There's been talk on YouTube lately about closing down university social justice courses, a much-needed reform. But would that be enough to heal the North American university system? Not by a long shot, unfortunately, because politically correct orthodoxy on university campuses has spread far beyond the confines of specific classes, creating a repressive environment of totalitarian dimensions. That's my subject on today's Fiamengo file. I'm Janice Fiamengo of the University of Ottawa, and in this video I will argue that there are troubling parallels between the communist regimes of the Eastern Bloc countries during the Cold War period and the politically correct hegemony on North American campuses, the purpose of both being to produce obedient soldiers for the New World Order. The differences are pertinent too, of course. Enemies of the official ideology in North America are not treated as harshly as they were in, let's say, the German Democratic Republic, and the surveillance reach of the feminist regime is not yet near total, as it was in the Soviet bloc. What we are experiencing today is soft totalitarianism, but it is totalitarianism, make no mistake. A system that, in the name of safety and respect for women, is creating a climate of fear in which men know that even the most innocent of words or gestures, or nothing at all, can bring down the disciplinary power of the authorities. I'm speaking today specifically about sexual harassment legislation, but the repression extends into many other realms as well. Recently, it was reported that the United States Justice Department is forcing universities to investigate any and all reported cases of sexual harassment, including what it calls, quote, unwelcome conduct or speech of a sexual nature, quote, regardless of whether it creates a hostile environment, end quote. As critics point out, this means that a huge amount of everyday interaction could be and likely will be investigated as sexual harassment. A much publicized case occurred last year when Professor Laura Kipnis of Northwestern University was investigated for a Title IX violation after she wrote an essay for the Chronicle of Higher Education on what she called the sexual paranoia on university campuses. Some students complained, saying that her criticism of the persecution of male professors created an environment in which female students were afraid to come forward to instigate more persecution. Kipnis was ultimately cleared, but the unpleasant process she endured will certainly have a chilling effect on open discussion of campus policy. Now, I admire Kipnis's courage in standing by her position, but she is, after all, a university professor protected by her union and her public profile, and, of course, she's a woman. Most such cases never see the light of day. They're resolved quietly and secretly behind closed doors, and the mostly men whose lives are ruined or at least severely disrupted never get to tell their stories. Moreover, such investigations have been going on for a very long time. At my university, for example, Policy 67 on sexual harassment has been in effect since 1998, nearly 2 decades. So, how is this related to the situation in the German Democratic Republic? Well, as under communism, the feminist anti-harassment regime is all about control of the populace through surveillance and punishment. In East Germany, it is estimated that up to 500,000 Germans, or 1 in 30 of the population, were employed as spies for the Stasi, in what one scholar has called a widespread, quote, culture of denunciation. The terror of being accused acted as a kind of, quote, wall in the mind, according to one commentator, spreading anticipatory obedience throughout the nation. From kindergarten on up, East German citizens were trained to monitor one another for incorrect attitudes and to share the information they gathered with authorities. Millions of ordinary people acted as informal collaborators with the state, on the lookout for minor failures of orthodoxy, such as, quote, skipping a Russian language class, making an ill-considered comment at the student union, or exhibiting a lack of the proletarian point of view, end quote. The keynote of the whole system was fear. One never knew when one might say or do the wrong thing and thus find oneself under investigation. And this is now the situation at universities across North America, where any evidence of male sexual thought crime is carefully monitored. In my country, Dalhousie University's sexual harassment policy defines harassment, and I'm not quoting the entire paragraph, just the most ridiculous bits. They're defined to include, quote, sounds or gestures emphasizing sex or sexual orientation, suggestive staring, inappropriate displays or distribution of sexually suggestive pictures, and unnecessary or unwanted physical contact of a sexual nature, such as patting, touching, pinching, or brushing against, end quote. Can you imagine investigating someone for suggestive staring? There's a wonderful Diana Davison video on this point, where the police officer asks, did he look at you like this? Or like this? Or like this?
Did he look at you like this? Did he look at you like this? Or did he look at you like this?
Imagine the poor fellow expelled from his university studies for brushing against someone. My university doesn't go into as much laugh-out-loud detail, defining sexual harassment broadly to include any, quote, unwanted sexual attention or any, quote, sexually oriented remark or behavior which may reasonably be perceived to create a negative psychological and emotional environment, end quote. I am blown away by the irony of that word reasonably in the description of the kinds of remarks that could create a negative psychological or emotional environment. Come on, sexually oriented attraction between young people is not a matter of reasonableness. And I have zero faith that the ideologues who framed these policies or who sit on these investigative committees are governed by reason. On the contrary, I have to ask what ridiculously prudish Victorian fantasy world they're living in to write a sentence like that into policy and not expect that it will be consistently misapplied and will make men's lives a nightmare of false allegations. Don't these censorious busybodies understand that male-female relations in all aspects of life, but especially amongst young people, often involve erotic feelings expressed clumsily and crudely as a result of roiling emotions and desires, and are often structured by the age-old pattern of pursuit and retreat? For a range of biological and cultural reasons, it is still usually the young man who pursues the woman, who makes the first move, expresses his interest with looks, actions, and words, and invites the young woman out on dates. That the recipients of, quote, unwanted sexual attention may sometimes feel uncomfortable, maybe even deeply uncomfortable. Well, that's a fact of life, regrettable at times, but not something a university investigative committee should be involved in at all. It is something for adult students to deal with on their own, perhaps in consultation with a counselor if necessary, but not in consultation with a disciplinary board with the power to expel a young man for pursuing a woman who didn't happen to find him attractive. I'm not talking, of course, about criminal behavior such as sexual assault. That should be dealt with by the police and the courts. I'm talking about the complex emotional and psychological dynamics of human sexual interaction. The fact is that such interaction is rife with the possibility of hurt, misunderstanding, manipulativeness, covert aggression, and yes, downright nastiness, frequently actually on the part of young women. Do these disciplinary boards care about the hurt feelings of the young man who thought The girl he had been flirting with was really interested in him, only to find out that she already had a boyfriend and was just using him for help with their science project, only to discard him later. That can be awful and may well involve sleepless nights, anxiety, insecurity, lowered self-esteem, and difficulty concentrating on schoolwork. So are we going to strike committees to deal with that too? Perhaps to expel young women who repeat the offense, as so many do? Of course not, because feminist ideologues aren't interested in these often male forms of woundedness. Feminist ideologues are not interested in the various emotional and psychological abuses that young women routinely inflict on young men and that create real distress that actively interferes with male students' ability to participate in university learning. Feminist authorities are only interested in what they can class amongst the ever-expanding category of sexual trauma for women, even if the trauma is of the objectively trivial sort that any mature human being should be able to deal with. Nobody who impartially examines these sexual harassment policies could doubt that they are not mainly about protecting women from abuse. They're far too broadly conceived for that. They're about monitoring, stigmatizing, and controlling male sexuality, making it a punishable wrongdoing for an adult male merely to express sexual interest in an adult female, especially an adult male who is, for whatever reason, deemed creepy or unattractive by the woman he approaches. This is an outrageous incursion on individual freedom and testifies to a deeply heterophobic and man-hating culture. Because the vast majority of the records related to sexual harassment investigations are confidential, we simply can't know how many male students have been disciplined or what range of sanctions has been applied to them. I've received many emails from men whose lives have been turned upside down by investigations of words or actions they can barely remember. Defenders of these committees will point out that the men aren't always found guilty or always harshly punished. Accusations may be deemed unfounded, or the issue between the complainant and the respondent may be resolved relatively easily with a mediated discussion and a simple apology. Well, I don't care. The humiliation and the degradation are still massive, no matter the outcome. The environment of fear created by these secretive tribunals cannot be underestimated. Such policies state openly, often in their introductory remarks, that their purpose is not only to punish misbehavior, but to, quote, be educational, as the Dalhousie University statement maintains. In other words, the very existence of the policy will, quote, increase awareness and sensitivity to the negative impact of sexual harassment. It's clever, isn't it? Actually, the existence of the policy does much more than that. It increases awareness of the special protected status of women on university campuses, of the power of their words to destroy men's lives, and of the general loathing and contempt for the sexual expression of, mainly as it happens, low-status men. These policies are designed to put men on notice that they can continue studying at university only so long as an informant for the feminist thought police doesn't report them to a disciplinary committee. Welcome to the soft totalitarianism of the Democratic Republic of University North America.